The storage closet door swung open at 6:43 on a Thursday evening. Robert Hayes froze. Inside, crouched on an overturned bucket between shelves of paper towels and cleaning supplies, sat Rosa Martinez, his maid, eating pasta from a plastic container. In the dark, her fork stopped midway to her mouth. Their eyes met. She wasn't stealing. The leftovers were 2 days old, destined for the trash. But the shame on her face cut deeper than any theft. She stood so fast the bucket tipped. The container nearly fell. And in that split second, Robert saw something that would shatter everything he thought he knew about the woman who'd been caring for his daughter for 3 weeks. Something that would force him to follow her home one rainy night. Something that would reveal a truth he'd been too blind to see. What he discovered in that cramped apartment across town didn't just break his heart. It rebuilt it completely. The coffee maker hissed at 6:15 every morning, the same mechanical sound that had marked the beginning of Robert Hayes' days for the past 3 years. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, watching the city below start to wake, the steam from his cup rising between him and the glass like a thin veil separating 2 worlds. The apartment was silent except for that hissing, the kind of silence that felt expensive, insulated by thick walls and thicker carpets that swallowed footsteps whole. On the marble counter sat a second cup, already prepared, already cooling, waiting for someone who would never drink it again. Robert Hayes had built an empire in commercial real estate by the time he turned 38, the kind of success that came with penthouses and private elevators, and a name that made junior associates straighten their ties. His days were measured in contracts and conference calls, in decisions that moved millions from one column to another, on spreadsheets he rarely looked at anymore. The numbers had stopped meaning anything after Catherine died, but he kept making them grow anyway, because that was what he knew how to do. The only thing that still made sense when everything else had fallen apart in ways he couldn't fix with money or meetings or the sheer force of will that had gotten him everything else in life. The apartment reflected his success in clean lines and neutral tones, designer furniture that no one ever sat on, art on the walls chosen by someone he'd paid to choose it. Everything had its place, everything was perfect, and nothing felt like home. Harper's toys were confined to her room, her backpack hung on the same hook every day, her cereal bowl washed and put away before she left for school. Order was all he had left to give her, structure in place of the warmth he couldn't seem to reach anymore, buried somewhere beneath the weight of spreadsheets and silence. Harper was 8 now, with her mother's dark hair and his grey eyes, a combination that hurt to look at sometimes in the morning light. She moved through the apartment like a ghost, quiet in the way children became when they learned their presence was easier if it was small. She ate her cereal without talking, packed her own lunch from the containers he left in the refrigerator, tied her shoes with the careful concentration of someone who'd learned not to ask for help. They existed in the same space like planets in separate orbits, close enough to share gravity but never quite touching, spinning through their routines with the precision of people who'd forgotten there was any other way to live. That was the world Rosa Martinez walked into on a Tuesday morning in late September, carrying a small bag and wearing a wool cardigan that had seen better years, maybe better decades. The agency had sent her with impeccable references, a quiet demeanor, and the kind of steady presence that didn't demand attention or explanation. She was in her early 40s, with hands that knew work and eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment, and she moved through the apartment like water finding its level, filling spaces without disturbing them. Robert had interviewed her for 15 minutes, asked the standard questions, and hired her on the spot because she didn't try to fill the silence with unnecessary words, didn't offer condolences about Catherine that would have required him to respond. Rosa started the next day, arriving at 7 in the morning and leaving at 6 in the evening, fitting herself into the machinery of their lives with remarkable ease. She cleaned without moving things, cooked meals that appeared on the table at the right times, washed clothes that reappeared in drawers as if by magic. Harper's school uniforms were always pressed, her lunchbox always packed with more care than Robert's hasty assemblies, small notes tucked inside with smiley faces, and words of encouragement that he never would have thought to write. The apartment began to smell like something other than cleaning products and emptiness, like cinnamon and vanilla and the warm yeast of fresh bread, scents that crept into corners that had been sterile for too long. But Rosa never ate with them. Robert noticed it the first week, how she would prepare elaborate meals and then disappear into the laundry room or the storage closet while they ate, emerging only to clear plates and wash dishes. When he'd told her to help herself to anything in the kitchen, she'd nodded with a small smile and thanked him, but he never saw her take anything. She brought her lunch in a small container, ate it quickly during her break, and drank only water from the tap, never the bottled water in the refrigerator or the coffee from the expensive machine that hissed every morning. There was something about the cardigan, too. Robert had noticed it the first day and kept noticing it, the way it hung on her frame, the elbows worn thin, the color faded from navy to something closer to gray. After the second week, he'd left a box of clothes in the laundry room, things Catherine had bought but never worn, designer labels still attached, quality that would last years. Rosa had thanked him profusely, her eyes bright with something that might have been tears. But the next day she wore the cardigan again, and the box remained untouched on the shelf where he'd left it. Harper noticed Rosa in ways she hadn't noticed anything in months. She started lingering in the kitchen after school, doing homework at the counter while Rosa chopped vegetables, her small voice asking questions that Rosa answered with patience and interest. She laughed at something Rosa said, a sound so unexpected that Robert looked up from his laptop in the study. The spreadsheet forgotten as he listened to his daughter's giggle echo through the apartment for the first time since the funeral. When he came to the kitchen, they both went quiet, Harper returning to her homework and Rosa to her chopping, and he felt like an intruder in his own home, separate from something warm and alive that he couldn't quite reach. The discovery happened 3 weeks after Rosa started, on a Thursday evening when Robert had come home early from a cancelled meeting. The apartment was quiet, Rosa's coat still on the hook, which meant she was still there, though he couldn't hear her moving around. He went to the kitchen for water and noticed the light under the storage closet door, a thin golden line in the dimness of the hallway. The closet was where they kept surplus supplies, extra paper towels and cleaning products, and the boxes of food he bought in bulk, because it was efficient, economical, in a way that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with not wanting to shop more than once a month. He opened the door without thinking, without knocking, and found Rosa sitting on an overturned bucket in the narrow space between shelves, a plastic container in her lap. The container held dinner leftovers from 2 nights ago, pasta with meat sauce that she was eating with a plastic fork. Quickly and quietly, her back curved over the food like she was protecting it. She looked up when the door opened, her eyes wide in the sudden spill of light from the hallway, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then she stood so quickly the bucket tipped over, the container nearly falling from her hands, and he saw something in her face that cut through him like glass, sharp and unexpected. It was shame, pure and profound, the kind that came from being caught at something fundamental. Robert had closed the door and walked away, his heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with surprise and everything to do with recognition. He'd seen hunger before, in his childhood, in his mother's careful rationing of food when his father left, in the way she'd given him her portions and claimed she'd eaten earlier. He'd built his fortune to escape that feeling, that helplessness, and here it was in his own home, hiding in a closet, eating leftovers in the dark because the light might give her away. That night, he lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the cardigan and the untouched box of clothes, about the way Rosa never took anything, never asked for anything, about the careful way she wrapped leftovers after dinner, always in containers, always secured with lids like she was preparing them for transport. He thought about Harper's laughter in the kitchen, about the notes in the lunchbox, about the way his daughter's face lit up when Rosa asked about her day. He thought about the pasta in the plastic container, about the overturned bucket, about eating in the dark because the alternative was asking, and asking meant admitting need, and need meant being vulnerable in ways that survival had taught her to avoid. The questions came slowly at first, then faster, crowding his thoughts like guests at a party he hadn't planned to host. Why would she hide to eat leftovers he'd have given her freely? Why wear the old cardigan when better options sat unused in the laundry room? Why bring her own meager lunch when the refrigerator was full of food he'd told her to help herself to? The answers were there, hovering just beyond his understanding, requiring him to see past the surface of his own privilege, to recognize that an invitation to help herself might sound different to someone who'd learned that taking anything, even when offered, came with invisible costs and unspoken expectations. He started watching her the next day, not obviously, not in ways that would make her uncomfortable, but with the attention he usually reserved for financial reports and contract negotiations. He noticed how she moved through the apartment with minimal impact, touching only what needed to be touched, using only what needed to be used. He noticed how she portioned meals, always generous for him and Harper, always with extra that she'd carefully pack away after they finished eating. He noticed how she declined his offers casually, with smiles and thanks that created the illusion of choice without actually choosing anything for herself. He noticed, and the noticing opened something in him that had been closed for 3 years, a capacity for awareness beyond his own circumscribed world of loss and routine. Harper noticed him noticing. She was perceptive in ways that surprised him, watching him watch Rosa with those grey eyes that missed nothing. One morning, while Rosa was in the other room, Harper looked up from her cereal and said quietly, "She makes you see things, doesn't she?" He didn't know how to answer that, didn't know if his 8-year-old daughter had just articulated something profound or if he was reading meaning into random observation. But Harper went back to her cereal with a small smile, and he realized that his daughter had been seeing things all along, seeing Rosa, seeing him, seeing the space between them that was starting to feel less like distance and more like potential. The watching became a kind of meditation, pulling his attention away from spreadsheets and into the present moment in ways he hadn't experienced since before Catherine got sick. He found himself coming home earlier, lingering in doorways, observing the small rituals that structured Rosa's day. She sang quietly while she cleaned, old songs in Spanish that he didn't understand, but that carried emotion in their melodies, happiness and sorrow braided together in ways that felt honest and whole. She folded laundry with the same care someone might use handling precious artifacts, smoothing each piece flat, aligning corners and seams with precision that spoke of respect for the objects themselves, for the work they represented, for the bodies they would cover. She talked to Harper like an equal, never condescending, never dismissive, asking real questions and listening to the answers with full attention. She remembered details, followed up on stories, noticed haircuts and new shoes and changes in mood. She was present in ways that Robert had forgotten were possible, ways he'd abandoned when grief had hollowed him out and left only the mechanical parts functioning. Watching her made him aware of his own absence, not cruelly but clearly, like looking in a mirror and seeing the truth of yourself reflected back without softness or excuse. 3 days after the closet incident, he saw her packing leftovers again, but this time he watched from the study doorway, hidden in shadow. She worked methodically, dividing the remaining pot roast and vegetables into 3 separate containers, sealing each one carefully, stacking them in her bag with the gentleness of someone handling something irreplaceable. She cleaned the kitchen until it shone, wiped down counters that were already clean, checked the lock on the refrigerator door twice, and then stood for a moment with her hand on the counter, her head bowed, her shoulders carrying weight he couldn't name but could suddenly feel. He wanted to ask. The question sat in his throat every time he saw her, every time she refused coffee, or declined to sit, or wrapped up food she'd cooked but wouldn't eat in his presence. But asking felt like intrusion, like forcing her to explain something that was hers to keep private, like demanding vulnerability as payment for employment. He'd built his fortune on knowing when to push and when to wait, on reading situations and timing his moves for maximum effect. But this wasn't business, and Rosa wasn't a deal to be negotiated. She was a person with her own story, her own reasons, her own dignity that he had no right to compromise, even with good intentions. So he didn't ask, but he adjusted. He started cooking more, preparing extra portions with the excuse of meal prep for the week, leaving food in containers that were easy to transport. He bought groceries more frequently, stocking the pantry with basics that never seemed to diminish, buying the kind of staples that lasted, that could feed a family, that didn't require refrigeration or special preparation. He left cash in envelopes in the laundry room, labeled vaguely as bonuses or holiday gifts, always more than seemed reasonable, always with casual notes that didn't require acknowledgement or thanks. Rosa took the cash, but not the food, and he couldn't figure out why until Harper mentioned offhandedly that Rosa walked to the bus stop every evening, even in the rain, even when he'd offered to call her a car. Walking meant carrying, and carrying had limits, and suddenly the containers made sense. The careful rationing, the choices that prioritized portability over quantity. She could only take what she could carry, and she was already carrying more than he'd realized, weight both literal and metaphorical, responsibilities that extended beyond this apartment and into a life he knew nothing about. The investigation started without conscious decision, more curiosity than intent, small questions to the agency that had sent her, casual inquiries that felt wrong even as he made them, but that he couldn't stop himself from pursuing. The agency was professional and discreet, giving him only the information that was relevant to employment. But between the lines, he read a story of consistency and hardship, of references from families who praised her work ethic and reliability, of gaps in employment that suggested struggle, of an address in a neighborhood he knew only from crime statistics and urban renewal proposals that never quite materialized. He looked up the address on a map, zooming in on Street View, seeing rows of identical buildings with peeling paint and sagging balconies, laundromats and corner stores with bars on the windows, bus stops where people waited in weather that the suburbs had learned to avoid, with garage door openers and remote starters. It was 15 miles from his penthouse, but might as well have been a different country, a different century, a different understanding of what it meant to get through a day. And Rosa traveled it twice daily, walking and buzzing and walking again, carrying whatever she could carry, moving between worlds that existed in the same city but operated on entirely different principles. Harper got sick on a Tuesday night, a fever that spiked suddenly and sent Robert into the kind of panic that money couldn't solve. He called Rosa without thinking, even though it was past 9, even though she'd gone home hours ago, his voice tight with worry that surprised him with its intensity. She answered on the second ring and was there within an hour, arriving breathless and concerned, her cardigan buttoned wrong in her haste. She took over with calm efficiency, sponging Harper's forehead with cool water, monitoring her temperature, singing softly in Spanish while Robert paced the hallway feeling useless and afraid. Harper's fever broke around 2 in the morning, her temperature sliding back toward normal in the quiet hours when the city slept, and the penthouse felt both enormous and intimate. Rosa stayed in the chair beside Harper's bed, her hand on the girl's forehead, her voice a low murmur of comfort and reassurance. Robert watched from the doorway, seeing his daughter relaxed in ways she never was with him, seeing the trust and comfort in her sleeping face, and something broke open in his chest that had been locked for 3 years. "You should go home," he said quietly, not wanting to wake Harper, but needing to say something, to acknowledge what Rosa had done, the distance she'd traveled to be here, the sleep she'd sacrificed without question or complaint. Rosa looked up, her face tired but peaceful in the dim light from the hallway. "She's okay now. The fever was just a virus, nothing serious. But I'll stay a little longer, just to be sure." "You have your own family," Robert said. And it wasn't a question, but it wasn't quite a statement either. Something in between, an opening for her to fill or ignore as she chose. Rosa's hand stilled on Harper's forehead, and for a moment Robert thought she wouldn't respond. Then she smiled, small and tired, and infinitely sad. "Yes, 2 little ones since. They're with a neighbor tonight. It's okay. They understand." "How old?" The question came out before he could stop it, genuine curiosity mixing with something deeper, a need to know, to understand, to see past the careful boundaries they'd maintained for weeks. 4 and 6, a boy and a girl, Diego and Lucia. Her voice softened when she said their names, love making the syllables round and warm. "They're good kids, patient kids. They've had to be." Robert nodded, not trusting himself to say more, afraid that any question would sound like judgment or pity, afraid that his sudden awareness of her life beyond his apartment would somehow diminish her dignity or his own. He wanted to ask about their father, about how she managed, about why she hid in closets to eat food he'd have given her freely. But the questions felt invasive, presumptuous, like demanding she perform her hardship for his enlightenment. Instead, he went to the kitchen and made coffee. Strong and hot, the way his mother used to make it when she worked night shifts and needed to stay awake. He brought 2 cups to Harper's room, handed one to Rosa without comment, and settled into the chair on the other side of the bed. They sat in silence, drinking coffee and watching his daughter sleep. 2 people from different worlds sharing a moment of commonality in the care of a child, in the vigil that parents kept when fever turned night into liminal space between fear and relief. Rosa left at dawn, refusing his offer of a car with gentle insistence, saying the walk would wake her up, that the bus was reliable, that she'd be fine. He watched her from the window, seeing her small figure cross the street below, the cardigan pulled tight against the October chill, her bag over her shoulder, carrying whatever she carried back to Diego and Lucia, and a life he was only beginning to understand. Harper slept until noon, waking refreshed and asking for Rosa, disappointed when Robert explained she'd gone home but would be back tomorrow, that she'd stayed all night to make sure Harper was okay. "She loves us," Harper said simply, matter-of-factly, as if it were obvious, as if love were something you could measure in hours kept vigil and foreheads sponged cool and songs sung soft in the dark. Robert wanted to say that Rosa worked for them, that love wasn't part of the employment contract, that care could be professional without being personal. But he looked at his daughter's face, at the certainty there, at the knowledge that children had about what mattered and what didn't, and he couldn't say any of it. Because Harper was right. Rosa did love them. Or at least loved Harper, had given her something Robert's money couldn't buy and his grief couldn't provide, had filled spaces in his daughter's life that he'd left empty without knowing they existed. The realization shifted something fundamental in his understanding of their arrangement, of what Rosa brought to their home beyond clean counters and folded laundry. She'd given Harper the thing he'd been unable to give since Catherine died, the simple presence of someone who saw her, heard her, remembered her favorite color, and what made her laugh, and how she liked her sandwiches cut diagonal instead of straight across. She'd created a space where Harper could be a child again instead of a quiet ghost moving through rooms that echoed with absence. And what had he given Rosa in return? Money, yes. Fair wages, even generous by industry standards. But he'd also given her the need to hide in closets to eat, the weight of gratitude that prevented her from taking what he freely offered, the exhausting performance of professional distance that ignored the reality of her life beyond his walls. He'd created an environment where she could work but not exist, where her presence was welcome as long as it remained service-shaped, where her humanity was acceptable only insofar as it aligned with his needs and schedule. The thought sat heavy in his stomach as he made Harper soup for lunch, as he worked from home that afternoon with one ear always tuned to his daughter's room, as he realized how much of his life for the past 3 years had been about control, about managing variables, about creating order in place of the chaos that grief represented. He'd built walls around himself and Harper, thick and high, letting in only what he could categorize and compensate for, keeping out anything that might require him to feel beyond the narrow bandwidth he'd allotted for emotion. Rosa had somehow slipped through those walls, not by assault, but by quiet persistence, by showing up every day and doing her work and loving his daughter without asking permission, without demanding reciprocity, without expecting anything beyond fair payment for her time. She'd made herself essential not through dramatic gestures, but through accumulated small kindnesses, through notes in lunchboxes and songs while cleaning and staying through the night, when fever required vigil and his panic required steadiness. He wanted to do something for her, something meaningful, something beyond the envelopes of cash that she took, but that clearly weren't enough, weren't addressing whatever need made her eat leftovers in dark closets and wear cardigans with holes at the elbows. But every option felt wrong, too much or too little, patronizing or insufficient, the kind of gesture that would make him feel better without actually helping her, that would position him as savior rather than seeing her as equal. The answer came to him on Thursday evening, watching Rosa pack up leftovers again, the same careful ritual he'd witnessed dozens of times. This time he saw it clearly, saw past his own assumptions and into the reality she lived. She wasn't taking the food because she was hungry, at least not primarily. She was taking it home to Diego and Lucia, feeding her children before herself, making sure they had meat and vegetables and the kind of nutrition she could never afford on her own budget. The leftovers weren't theft or even desperation. They were love. Practical and determined. The same love that made her walk miles in the rain and work 60-hour weeks and wear cardigans until they fell apart because new ones meant less money for milk and bread and whatever else 4-year-olds and 6-year-olds needed to grow. Understanding changed everything and nothing. Robert still didn't know what to do, how to help without hurting, how to give without taking away the dignity that Rosa carried like armor against a world that had probably tried to strip it from her more times than he could imagine. But he knew he had to try, had to find a way past his own discomfort and privilege, had to risk getting it wrong rather than doing nothing while pretending he was respecting her privacy. Friday morning, he came to the kitchen earlier than usual, finding Rosa already there, preparing breakfast with her usual quiet efficiency. Harper was still asleep, the apartment silent except for the sound of eggs being whisked and bread being toasted, domestic sounds that felt both ordinary and precious in the morning light. "Rosa," he said. And she turned, wooden spoon in hand, her expression open and expectant. I wonder if you might have dinner with us tonight. With Harper and me. Properly, I mean. At the table. Not after, not in the other room, but with us. He saw the refusal forming on her face, the polite decline that would maintain boundaries and keep roles clear, and he spoke quickly before she could say no. Harper would really like it. She talks about you constantly. And I'd like it too, if you're willing. Rosa studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face for something he hoped was there, some sign that the invitation was genuine, that it wasn't pity or charity or the kind of performance that guilt sometimes required. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly, a small smile touching her lips. I'd like that. Thank you. That evening, they sat together at the dining table that Robert usually ignored in favor of eating in the study or at the kitchen counter, the formal space feeling suddenly intimate with 3 place settings instead of 2. Rosa had made chicken with rice and vegetables, simple food prepared with care, and they ate together while Harper chatted about school and Rosa asked questions, and Robert found himself relaxing in ways he hadn't in years, the conversation flowing naturally, punctuated by laughter and comfortable silences that didn't require filling. After dinner, Rosa started to clear the plates, but Robert stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. Let me. You cooked. It's only fair. She looked uncertain, like the reversal of roles was somehow wrong, but Harper jumped up enthusiastically, already carrying her plate to the sink, and Rosa finally nodded, settling back into her chair with an expression that was equal parts relief and discomfort. Robert washed dishes while Harper dried, domestic teamwork that felt both foreign and right. And when they finished, Rosa was still sitting at the table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that Harper had made for her, her expression soft and distant, like she was memorizing the moment. Tell me about your kids, Robert said, taking the chair across from her. The question direct but gentle, an invitation rather than an interrogation. Rosa's face transformed, love and pride erasing the careful neutrality she usually maintained. Diego wants to be an astronaut. He's 4 and can barely reach the counter, but he's convinced he's going to Mars. Lucia is quieter, more careful. She likes to draw, spends hours with crayons making pictures of our family, always with the sun in the corner, always smiling. They sound wonderful, Robert said, and meant it, could see them in his mind, the little boy reaching for stars and the little girl drawing sunshine, could feel Rosa's love for them radiating across the table like heat from a fire. They are. They're everything. Her voice caught slightly, emotion breaking through the careful control. They're why I do what I do. Robert nodded, understanding blooming fuller now, pieces clicking into place. The food you take home, it's for them. Rosa's eyes widened slightly, surprise and shame mixing on her face, and Robert spoke quickly, needing her to understand, needing to get this right. I'm not upset. I'm asking because I want to help, because you take such good care of Harper, and I'd like to take care of your kids too, in whatever way I can.